why should people listen to you? What qualifies you as an expert on the subject?
I self-published like 6 books several years ago, and then before I finally got a publisher. Then I published with this publisher for about 6 or 7 years, and I did very well. Kind of just accidentally found myself making a living as a full-time author. All the producers want to control the creative, but the truth is they can't do anything without you. You need to write your shitty first draft, and everyone needs to do that, right? I did a talk here for the El Paso Writers League last month. The secret sauce is that
This is the Writers Are People Too podcast. Tonight we have with us Keith Giles, who is ready to discuss every writer's dream, how to make a living as a full-time author. So I'm so glad you're here to divulge all your wisdom to me. I've been trying to figure this out for a few years now. Even though I guess I'm technically unpublished, so I don't know why I'm complaining. Like, hey, how come I'm not making a living if I haven't even published anything yet? So I guess that's probably a good first step.
Step one,
but
you have to publish them.
Step one, and we'll get into what I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have a list of steps. We'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
But you're a third-time guest on the podcast, so you're sliding into first place for most guest appearances. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
And I guess my first question is, why should people listen to you? What qualifies you as an expert on the subject?
That's a great question, because I'm sure a lot of your listeners are like, who's this guy? Why am I listening to him? Well, let's see. You should listen to me, I guess, because I'm very much like most of your listeners, right? I'm someone who has always wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. I self-published like 6 books several years ago, and then before I finally got a publisher. And I never thought that would happen. Getting a publisher was huge. And then I published with this publisher for about 6 or 7 years. And I did very well with them. So as a self-published author, I did decent. And then as a published author, I did very well. And I learned a lot from, mostly experience. But also I spent 10 years working in a marketing agency as a copywriter, as a marketing and advertising copywriter. And I worked on marketing and advertising campaigns for like multi-million-dollar campaigns for like Microsoft, Cisco, Apple, IBM, all the technology. The company I worked for is the global distributor for all of those companies. And so I worked on campaigns for all those people. And so I learned a whole lot about digital content marketing, just marketing in general, everything from how to write blogs or social media posts that get attention, or website design and copywriting and layout for like websites and all that kind of stuff. So 10 years of experience doing that kind of stuff, which it took me a long time to figure out that I should probably take what I had learned marketing other people's stuff and learn how to market my own stuff. And eventually I did figure that out. And so I guess that's why people should listen to me, is because I sort of accidentally discovered, I kind of say tripped into, and I'll tell the story, but I kind of just accidentally found myself making a living as a full-time author. And as someone who never thought I could do it, just like you, and I'm sure also many of your listeners, I just thought this will never happen. It's a dream. It sounds great. But for many reasons, I just didn't think it was ever possible. But then I figured out it was. And I've been doing it now for about 5-6 years, I guess. So
awesome. Well, I think you have that backwards. I think most people come into this thinking they can do it.
Oh, okay.
And then along the way realize it's much harder than they thought. So maybe you have luck, maybe you have hard work, maybe you just have excellent ideas. All of these things wrap up to make you someone who's successful at this. But what would you tell someone who comes in perhaps a little bit more optimistic than they should?
Oh, I would, if someone comes in a little more optimistic than they should, I would say you need to be a little more pessimistic. Because, and here's the thing too, like, I did everything we're going to talk about in this interview is stuff that I did end up putting together like a little online course called Authors Academy to try to teach people what I had learned. Because that's one of the things I love doing anyway, is just helping people figure out stuff that I took a long time to figure out on my own. And when I was putting that online course together, I played around with titling it I was going to call it, the subhead was going to be something like Authors Academy was the name, but the way I was going to market it was something like how to be a full-time author in 10 years or more. Just to counter the stuff that I see all over social media. I see it all the time. I'm sure you guys all see it too. Be a full-time published author, be a New York Times bestseller in 90 days, or, publish your first book and be a best-selling author on Amazon in 30 days, whatever. I see that kind of stuff all the time. I have clicked on those things. I have gone to those webinars. I have listened to those guys because I'm always learning. I'm trying to what do they know that I don't know, right? And all of them are pretty much saying the same thing. And none of them are going to make anybody a best-selling author or a full-time author in 90 days or anything like that. So I try to say the opposite. I'm trying to say, lower your expectations. It's not going to happen. If it does happen, it won't be a quick and easy thing. I just don't think that that's real. I think there is a long runway to this, and you need to understand that before you go into it.
So I've heard of a program, and I'm unfamiliar with the program, the details of it. I just know the title. It's called 20 Books to 50K. And I think that's what it's called. Maybe it's 50 books to 20K. I don't know. Don't
Sure.
Quote me on that.
There's probably one
but
of
the
each.
idea is, as you write tons of books, your royalties year over year will grow on themselves, and the other books will sell themselves. And eventually you'll be able to make $50,000 a year if you have 20 books. Again, the gist of it. Does that more or less kind of go with what you're saying?
Yes. Okay. Now that strategy is part of my strategy. When I published my first book with Quoir Publishing, and now full disclosure, I am now co-owner of that company, but of course that didn't happen until like a year and a half ago. So when I was just an author being published with Quoir, I published the first book with them. It did really well, and then my publisher at the time, Raphael Polindo, suggested, "Hey, you should do a series." So I ended up doing this 7-part series, and again, that was accidental. I know things now. I know now why that works so well, but I didn't know it at the time. I sort of figured out after the fact. Oh, this is why that worked. But as I started building that series out, by the time I had 4 or 5 books in the series and they were all selling well, then every month my royalty statements from Quoir were exponentially going up and up and up, right? Because I wrote and published 7 books in 5 years. So roughly every 6 to 8 months, I was writing and publishing another book. And that was one of the ways that I kept my income steady. So I'd have a book that would come out. The book always does great, right? The week or the month that comes out. That's the best. That's the highest royalty month you're ever going to have usually, is the month that comes out. That's all the big push. It releases, boom, you get all these huge sales. Yay, you're number one for a couple of weeks or months. But then it'll slowly, the graph starts going down and down. And the best you can hope for is to kind of do enough to keep it from going all the way back down to zero. You want to just kind of keep it in the air, but it'll never surpass whatever it was that first month. At least in my experience, that's never happened, unless you end up on Oprah or something. But by the time that one of those books would start to dip down to kind of where it's going to probably rest, I would release my next book. And then, so boom, it comes back up again. So now my royalty statement is 2 books. Right, 2 sales for 2 books. And then 6 to 8 months later, my royalties are sales for 3 books. And then it's sales for 4 books and 5 and 6 and 7. So now I've got about, I just published my 12th book. No, I'm sorry, my 11th book with Quoir. I think that's right. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yes, 11. I published my 11th book with Quoir. And so that is part of the strategy. That's not all the strategy. If you are lucky enough that you can write, because of course it's not just quantity, it's quality too, right? You can't just say, hey, look at me, I wrote 7 books and how come I'm not doing well? Well, they have to be good books. They have to sell well. You have to build a platform and an audience. You have to speak to that audience. You have to cultivate that and nurture that audience through various means, various things that you have to work on to keep that going. And so, but if all those things are working, if you're firing on all those cylinders, then yes, it works. And that is one of the ways that I ended up being a full-time author.
So you mentioned you had self-published 6 and you currently have 11 with Quoir. Is that approximately how many books you've written total? Or
That's exactly right. Yes. So 6 self-published, which I never mention or speak of or tell anybody about. I have a website that you can buy the PDF versions of them for $4. but I'd never tell that to anybody. I never encourage anybody to read. I don't even believe most of the stuff that's in there anymore. So they're out there, but yeah, I've moved on from that stuff.
Okay. So let's talk about Quoir for a little bit. So as you mentioned, you're co-owner of Quoir Publishing. How did you come about to acquire Quoir Publishing?
Well, so what happened was the guy that started Quoir Publishing, my friend Raphael Polindo, started it really as a favor to some friends of his. He already had a job. He's a great designer. And in fact, so Quoir always had incredible covers and internal design because he's a great designer. But he started off as a friend, like as a favorite of friends. So he had a couple of friends who had self-published books, and he liked, he knew them. They were friends of his. He liked their books. He would read their books, and he would be like, hey, the book itself is great, but the cover is horrible. And the internal design is just really amateur, and it just looks really bad. And I'm a designer, hey, I could help you out with that. And so he started doing that for a couple of his friends that had self-published some stuff. Started a little side business, Quoir Publishing. And mainly that's what he was doing in the beginning. And then he slowly started like going after authors, but he always had a day job, right? And he actually never had intended that Quoir was going to become his full-time job. That was never part of his plan. It was like, I'm just going to do this on the side. I'm going to help out some friends of mine. I'm going to publish some great books, but I'm going to do my day job. That's what's going to pay the bills and take care of my family. So then I come along. I think I was maybe the 6th or 7th author he signed. And so like I said, I was with them for like 6 years, 7 years. And I was their best-selling author. And the person that was sort of the second best-selling author was Matthew DeStefano. And he and I were doing a podcast together, so I knew him. And so he and I had this sort of vested interest in keeping Quoir going because we were actually depending on those royalty checks every month, And then, but at that point, after about 6, 7 years, Quoir had grown beyond Ralph's ability to sustain it. It was literally like, I either need to sell this company or give it away to somebody else who can take it from this point further, or I'm going to have to shut it down because I just can't keep up with it, because he has it, like, again, he had his own job. And so he came to us, he came to Matthew and I, and he said, hey guys, explain the situation, which by the way, we were very aware of because we were very frustrated because he was always so busy with his life and his other job that, Matt and I are going, hey, where's my cover? And hey, when's my book coming out? And hey, when are you going to give me this file? And hey, and he wouldn't answer us for weeks. And it's because, and we were very angry and frustrated about that, right? Like, hey man, what's going on? So the call was basically to say, well, here's the problem. And the solution is, I'd like to hand you the company. And, which was a huge surprise. Matthew and I, neither one of us ever wanted to own a publishing company. Honestly, that's what's so ironic. I self-published 6 books. When I published with Quoir, my first book with them, I was so happy because all I had to do was write the book. And then I could just hand it over and Ralph would give it a great cover. He'd do a great internal design and he would do the Kindle setup. He would do the audio book, all that stuff. I didn't have to mess with Amazon or Ingram or any of that stuff. He did all that back end stuff I hated. And I could just focus on writing books and promoting my books and stuff like that. And I was really happy. I remember even being so excited. I'd just sometimes stop myself and go, I have a publisher. Like, that's cool. I have a publisher and that's awesome. A lot of authors can't say that. So, when he came to us at first, it was like, you want to own the company, you want to be part owner of the company. It was like, well, now I'm self-publishing again. I didn't want to do that, but now that we're doing it, it actually works out great because I don't handle any of that back end stuff that I hated. Matthew, my partner, does that. I get to do author relations and marketing and promotions and that kind of stuff for our authors and stuff. And but it works out great. It works out pretty good.
So would you say that as of this moment, more of your bandwidth is taken being a publisher or being an author?
And that is part of the problem. That has really been the thing. So because Matthew and I are both authors, which is good and bad, right? So that's kind of our unofficial tagline. It's by authors for authors, So when we're talking to other authors that we're signing or we're talking to them about their book project or something, we're talking as authors to other authors. And we know the pain points and we know the issues about your writing the book and editing the book and, giving away your baby and all that kind of stuff, right? So we get all that stuff, which is good. But the past year and a half, coming now on close to 2 years, helping run Quoir, running Quoir, it's growing, which means it's taking a lot more of our bandwidth. But Matt and I are still authors, right? So I have a couple of personal projects as an author that I still want to publish and work on. Matthew has a couple of things he wants to work on. He and I are actually trying to co-write a book together at this moment. But it's really challenging to be an author and run a publishing company where you have so much of your attention diverted towards, reviewing manuscripts for other people, checking their edits, working with them on their cover design, talking about their release dates. I do a lot of coaching with authors about oh, hey, your book's coming out, so let's set up some podcast interviews. Let's, talk about your marketing strategy and how you're going to market the book on your social media and all that kind of stuff, as well as what Quoir's going to do to promote it and that kind of thing. So it's hard, I would say. It's at this point, it's probably 70-30, like 70% of my time is Quoir. And maybe that's generous. It may not be actually that, maybe 80-20. But yeah, 20 or 30% of my time is my projects, like what I want to do as a writer. And that gets harder. I have to fight for that. Matthew has to fight for that. It's harder and harder to do that. But as we're growing, our goal is eventually to hire other people so that they can do the day-to-day running of Quoir, all that stuff, and he and I can go back to being authors.
Yeah, this is where the entrepreneurial part of the business comes in, right? It's like every entrepreneur has things that they excel at. And I think most entrepreneurs in general excel at sales, and they suck at the administrative stuff, and they suck at, there's a whole laundry list of things they suck at. And one of the biggest tells of a successful business is when the entrepreneur can finally hand off the things that they suck at to other people and hire. And obviously, for a startup, you don't have cash flow to just hire a ton of people to do all this stuff. So there are challenges with that. But once you get over the hump and you can focus on the things that you love and the things that you want to do, I think you'll be more successful in the long run.
I think so. And we're so close, Matt. I feel like we're really close. Like one of the things that Quoir is doing, in addition to the publishing side of the business, which is doing very well, and I think we have dialed in, we have figured out now what works and what doesn't. And so going forward, we know how to kind of manage our release schedules, the kinds of authors that we're going to sign, that we believe in, that we know they're going to help. And I hate to say it this way, but there's a fine line between the kind of author and the kind of book project that we like, that's good quality, but also one that's going to sell well enough to sort of carry that month sales. Like we need to think strategically as a business to say, every month we're looking at our release schedule and saying, okay, every month we might put out 3 to 4 books. Sometimes we're putting out a book a week, right? So some months we're doing 3 books a month. Sometimes we're doing a book a week. So 4 books a month. But at least one of those books needs to be a big one, right? It needs to be one that's going to carry the rest of the month in sales so that we can all continue to live. And so we have to think that way now, right? We have to think that way when we're looking at book projects and saying, and we do this just so you know, so there are some things we're publishing because what? I like this person, something about the project that I really like. It may not sell, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to take a chance on it because I believe in them and I believe in their work and I believe in what they're doing. And sometimes it's even it's not even necessarily that book. It's maybe their second or third book. Like I'm looking at long term, this is someone I want to keep working with because I think eventually they're going to find a really good audience. So it's juggling those things as a business. But so that's the publishing side. We also have a podcast network that we've started. It's now about 19 podcasts and it's monetized and it's just now really starting to do pretty well. So that's providing some income. And now we're starting something called Quoir Academy. And that is a online course platform. So I have about 20 courses already based on my other books that are already created. But we're trying to help all of our other authors create their courses of their own, sometimes related to their book, sometimes not. Doesn't have to be related to their book. But Quoir's providing the platform. We're going to pay for the platform and the app and all that stuff and the marketing and stuff. Help them put the course together. And then we're going to grow that as a sort of another business unit. And we really think that's going to take off pretty well. And so our hope is that which with those all three of those things, those kind of three parts of the business, that we are eventually going to be able to hire other people out, and we're going to kind of go over that hump, and then we can pay people to do the kind of day-to-day stuff, and then he and I can go back to focusing on writing our own projects and stuff.
Yeah. And, not to derail the conversation too much, but you mentioned this podcast network. Just a couple sentences. What's that?
Yeah. So this was I think this was kind of a genius idea for us as a publishing company. Matt and I do a podcast. We've been doing it, again, as long as we've both been publishing with Quoir. Quoir actually helped start, Raphael Polindo helped start this podcast and produce this podcast in the beginning. It's called Heretic Happy Hour. And so that's how really Matt and I got together in the first place. So when Matt and I took over the podcast, took over Quoir Publishing, he and I were already doing Heretic Happy Hour. And he had a spinoff podcast called Apostates Anonymous. I have a solo podcast called Second Cup with Keith. And then as authors, we do podcast interviews all the time promoting our books. And over the last 7-8 years, I've gotten to know a lot of these podcast creators that, like every time I have a book, it's almost like I just reach out to them. Hey, I published a book. Here it is. We schedule a time. It's almost automatic. And I go on their show and stuff. And so anyway, we got this idea of like, what doesn't Quoir put together a podcast network of all these different podcasters that we know, we're friends with them, and we have good connection with them. So we did that. I think when we started, we had like 7 podcasts. And as I said, it's grown now to about 19, maybe 20 podcasts at this point. And we partner with Patheos, which is a blogging platform. They host for free. They run ads for us. Quoir doesn't take any of the money from the ads. So Quoir is a publishing company. We create the network. We have a contract. Quoir, the publishing company, has the contract with Patheos. The individual podcasts have no contract. It's just they want to be a part of the network. They get monetized. They get free hosting. All we ask them, this is the benefit for Quoir. What Quoir asks them to do is run a 30-second ad, a pre-roll ad, before every episode. That is an ad for one of our books. Those are free ads. When you have over like 100,000 downloads combined across those 20 podcasts every month, we couldn't afford to buy those ads if we had to pay for them. But since we quote unquote own the network, we don't pay for those ads. That's just hey, do us a favor, right? We're helping you. You're getting monetized. You're getting free hosting. You're part of the Quoircast network. Just run these ads for our authors ahead of every episode, and that's pretty much all we ask. And that has helped us a lot.
Strategic marketing background coming into play.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's been huge for us. And I think most publishers our size, maybe even some bigger than us, don't have that. Like, we're sort of an automatic, we're going to run ads for your book, and you're going to get these kind of impressions every month. So that's a really great thing we can offer to authors, who sign with us.
Nice. So, and I don't know if you have an answer to this specifically, but what would an author who comes to Quoir have as an experience that's different than perhaps a big 5 publisher?
Oh, that is a great question. Thank you, by the way. You're giving me a great chance to talk about Quoir and what we do. I'm really proud of Quoir because, again, I came into this whole thing as an author myself, and I was always very impressed with how Quoir was an author-centric publishing company. And so when Matt and I took over, we're like, we're going to keep that. And so the big 5 publishers, even the smaller publishers, let's say like Whippenstock or InterVarsity, or this isn't the kind of the space that we play in, sort of like theology, nonfiction kind of stuff. Their contracts are typically like if you'd be lucky to get 10% royalty, maybe closer to 5 if you're a first-time author. I mean, it's very low. The contracts are not that great. The publishing company, in other words, keeps 80 to 90 or more percent of your royalties for your book. And that is usually after they recoup their costs. So what they will do, this is very similar to the music business. I worked in the music industry for a while as well, and it's very, very similar to the music industry, which is that the artists get screwed. So the publishing company will say, okay, we're going to sign you this contract. Let's say we're generous. Let's say you make 15%. of the royalty. But first, the publishing company says we're going to take 100% until we pay ourselves back for your cover design, your internal design, your marketing and promotions, everything they can nickel and dime you for. So think about that. I already told you, right? The first couple of months that your book is out is the most money it will ever make, right? Because it's all the big push. Those are all the sales are right there. That's the sweet right there. That's the plum. And they're going to take 100% of that until they pay themselves back. And then they're going to take 80% or 90% and give you 10, right? Or 5 or 10. And so, I mean, that's kind of a standard publishing deal, right? And then they're also, most of the time, not doing a whole lot of marketing for your book. You might get an ad online. They might do like a bundle ad or something with their a couple other authors, but not very much. You're not going to get a lot of help in marketing and promotions and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, that's the sad story. With Quoir, it's extremely different. With Quoir, Quoir works with a 60-40 royalty split. And that's huge, right? 60-40 is a huge split. No one is doing 60-40. Let me tell you what they're also not doing. They're not doing what we're doing, which is we're giving the author the 60. You make 60% of the royalty. No one will give you that deal. That's insane. Wow. If in fact, when we have signed authors that have published with other publishers and we say 60-40, they assume 40. And they're like, whoa, 40, that's awesome. We're like, no, the 40 is us. You get the 60. So that's the biggest thing. And again, the other thing is that you, with Quoir, you always own your book. I know a lot of authors who did book deals, published a book. I have a friend who published a really great book. The publishing company went out of business, but retained the rights to the book. So he can't get his own book back. He lost his own book. And, even though that company isn't around anymore, like the guy that owned the company is like, yeah, give me 10 grand and I'll sell you your book back. Right? It's stupid. It's a ripoff. But that happens in the music industry as well. So with Quoir, you own, at no point does Quoir own your book, ever. You sign a contract. In the contract, we are licensing your book from you. So let's say a year after you publish with us, you get a great deal from Zondervan or HarperCollins or some other publisher. They're like, oh my gosh, this book is great. We'd love to publish your book over here on our side. You can take it and run, and you can screw us if you want. That's what we're saying. But we're saying we don't want to stand in your way. Right. We want to be here to help you succeed. Our hope. So when we do that, right, when we have that kind of a contract, and because of the way we work with our authors, all of that is it's not contractual, but it's sort of we're hoping that you enjoy working with us so much. You see how much we really care about you and your book. We believe in you. We believe in your talent. We believe in your book. That we are willing to give you 60%. We are willing to let you keep the rights to your book forever, and all that you would say, hey, why would I go anywhere else? Because I promise you, you're going to go somewhere else. You're not going to get as good a deal, and they're not going to care about you the way we do. And so that's our hope, right? We're trying to basically say, again, we're authors. We know what it's like. We're trying to make this as author-centric as possible. And, we want to keep working with people. So.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I feel like you said something earlier, which is the creator gets screwed. And I feel like that happens in every industry. And I'm glad that you guys are kind of putting your foot down and saying, no, don't screw the creator. I mean, it's funny because without the creator, the publishers would have nothing to publish anyway.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, there's a great speech. I'm going to change genres a little bit. So I love movies. I love film. And Charlie Kaufman is one of my favorite directors and writers. He's an incredible screenwriter. He wrote Being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, movies like The Adaptation with Nicolas Cage. Great movie. And he gave a speech a couple of years ago. He won some award, some writing, a screenwriter's award or something like that he won. And the speech that he gave was fantastic. And he was basically talking about how in the movie industry, of course, in the film industry, it's the same thing. right? All the producers want to control the creative. They're not creative people. They don't know anything about creativity, but they're trying to tell you, the writer or the director, what you should do. And he just made that great comment in his speech about how, they want to convince you that you need them. But the truth is they can't do anything without you. If you don't write that script, they have nothing. There's nothing to produce, right? And it's the truth, you know what I mean? In all these different industries, you have the record company, the film company, the publisher taking advantage of the people that are creative. Like they're the ones that are actually creating the magic that you're putting the price tag on. And without them, you have nothing. So we realize that, again, because we're trying to make some magic ourselves. So we're trying to help people out a little bit and let them enjoy the fruit of their labor.
Awesome. All right. Well, stop pitching Quoir. We've already talked about it for 30 minutes now. Let's move on to how to make a living as a full-time author. So what's the first step? Well, you know what? I'm going to take a guess at what the first step is.
Yep.
I imagine the first step to becoming a successful author is writing a book. So how do you do that?
That is right. That's funny because, like, if you took my Authors Academy, that's what I say. Step 1, write a great book. After that, everything I'm going to say will make sense to you. But no, yeah, as far as writing the great book, well, it depends. Everyone's different, right? So I'll just tell you, this is my thing. I have primarily made a living writing nonfiction books. And it's gotten progressively easier for me to do that because I have my rhythm now, right? So when I'm getting ready to write a book, I blog. So I have a blog that I do on Patheos. And so typically it'll start there. I'm interested in the topic. I do enough research to write a couple of blog posts about it. I publish the blog posts. Excuse me. I pay attention to the comments that I get, and especially to the critical comments. So I want to know what isn't working, right? Keith, this makes no sense. Or, oh, Keith, you left that out, or you didn't explain that, or blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, good. I'm going to make a note of that because when I write the book on this topic, I want to be able to address that objection or, address that misunderstanding or make sure I don't, make that mistake again. So for me, typically I'll blog on a topic for a good long time. And once I've got a series of those blog posts, enough that I can say, okay, I have a picture now for what an outline for that book would look like. With me, really, it all begins with an outline. Sometimes, to be honest, I may just be blogging on some topics and I'm not thinking in the back of my mind, this is going to be a book. I'm just blogging about it because I'm interested, but I do it enough that I have enough of this material that I'm like, you know what? Wow, there's enough here. I've sort of tackled this from all these different angles. I could, I have enough material I could pull this together and I could create an outline and then I can start writing the book. So really, there's sort of the blogging phase. There's a research phase. When I'm researching nonfiction books, although I think this works for fiction as well, because I think when I've written fiction, I also will research things like when I write science fiction. I used to go down and look at Wired magazine and pay attention to the latest technology and all the cool kind of things happening. And if I found something cool that would give me an idea for something I wanted to use in a book, I would just grab that, either copy it and paste it and email it to myself and drop it into a folder in my email, or create a folder on my desktop where I would just keep notes and that kind of thing. But one way or the other, I'd be collecting notes on things for my book. When I realize I kind of reach this critical mass, okay, I think I'm ready. I have enough for a book here. I sit down and I write an outline. And for me, it's all about the outline. I know a lot of writers, especially fiction writers, this might be debatable because I hear both from both sides. You have people like Stephen King who say, if you write an outline to the book, why write the book at all? You already know how it's going to end. You already told yourself all the beats of the story. What's the point, right? But I've read other very successful authors who have said, no, you have to write an outline. You have to know the beats of the story. Your rising action, your falling action, your hero's journey, whatever. You got to know how you're going to do it so you can write the book. And so, I know that's debatable. Authors work different ways. For me, on the nonfiction side, I think you kind of need to know the ending. You kind of need to know what you're going to say and how you're going to say it and write that outline. So that's what works for me. And then once I've got an outline, here's why the outline really saves me. Because then when I decide, okay, I'm going to write this book, I block out time. And that's what I recommend people do. And it can be anything. When I self-published, I still had a full-time job. So I would work, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. I had 2 kids. I was married, right? So I had life and had things to do. But my times to write were early Saturday morning and Sunday morning. And so I would get up early. Everybody's still in bed. I make myself a cup of coffee, get my laptop, all my notes and my stuff, and go out, in the den or in the back porch and start writing. Put my headphones on, put on some Crystal Method. Vegas was my choice because it's instrumental. It doesn't interfere. And I could just write, and I would write for a couple of hours. And I think that's all that matters. If it's once a week for a couple of hours, do that. If you can manage to write an hour a day, do that. If you can write 30 minutes a day, do that. Although, you need enough time to get in the zone, I think, at least I do. But figure out what works for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then just be consistent. The important thing as well, and again, I'm sure you hear this all the time from authors, and this is true whether fiction or nonfiction, probably more true with fiction, but go ahead and write even if it's crap, right? That first draft will be garbage, right? You need to write your shitty first draft, and everyone needs to do that, right? Because I always tell people, think about some of your favorite books you've ever read, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. Just think about, man, I love that book. This book is so good. I promise you, that is not the first draft of that book. It's probably the third, fourth, fifth draft of that book, right? So,
I think
your job
Stephen
is just to write the crappy first draft.
Yeah. So I think it was in On Writing by Stephen King. Don't 100% quote me. I think it was this. He says in there, when you're writing your first draft, it's for you're telling yourself the story.
Yes.
And then after that, you write the second draft. It's to tell other people the story. Again,
I like that.
Terrible paraphrase, but
no, but that's great. I think that's great advice. See, so I have as a personal aside, like again, I've made it as a full-time author. I've written 11 nonfiction books that are doing very well and keeping me employed, keeping me paid. But I am just now going back to my first love, which is fiction, and I'm writing a science fiction novel right now, and I'm finding it really challenging. But I have to keep reminding myself that it is just for me, right? That this first draft is just for me. No one's going to see it but me. And I just need to write it and get it out on the page. And then I'll come back later and clean it up and, make it pretty.
Yeah, I had a very similar mentality. I remember when I wrote my first science fiction. I mean, it's not really science fiction. It's more space opera. I have to clarify that because people get confused. Like, science fiction is going to be realistic. No, there's like lasers and spaceships and like, it's a space opera. And I wrote that. I think I started in like 2015 or 16 or so. And I wrote it for about 2 years. And I would wake up at 5 a.m. every day before work to write for an hour.
There you go.
And it was for me. But like you said, it's been challenging for you. Is it a different process that's challenging? Is it making yourself do it? Like, why is it so challenging compared to your nonfiction?
Yeah, it's challenging for a couple of reasons. One is that, again, like I said, for 7 or 8 years, my brain has been wired for writing nonfiction. And I'm really, like I said, I'm good at it. I can do it pretty easily. If I have great ideas and I've got my outline, I can sit down and crank it out and do a good job and all that. Fiction is just a different muscle. It feels like it's a different, you know what I mean? It's a different muscle that I haven't exercised since I was a kid. I started off as like 9, 10 years old. I was writing stuff, and in junior high, I was writing stories to make my friends laugh. And then in high school, I was writing stuff, that I was trying to be a little more mature about my fiction. Then I fell in love, and then I started writing poetry. And then she broke my heart, and then I wrote even like bitter, angry poetry. Then I went to college, and I was a creative writing major, and I wrote some like hard-boiled detective fiction and stuff like that. So I started off, as a writer, wanting to be a writer, and assuming that was what I was going to be one day, was a fiction writer. That's what I thought I would do. In fact, I thought I'd be a science fiction writer. And then it didn't work out. Of course, things happened, and next thing I know, I'm writing nonfiction books, and I've got success at that. And okay, I'll keep doing that. But it's now, after all these years, trying to shift gears back into that mindset of what I started off doing, which was writing fiction. It's just not. It's not as easy as I remember it. It's a little more work now to kind of get back in that groove. And I gotta say, you interviewed my son David Giles, right? He wrote his first novel, There Once Were Orange Groves, and he inspired me I remember reading his novel, and I was like, man, this is really good. And it kind of sparked me again. Like I want to get back into writing fiction again. This is so good. And I've told David this, that he tricked me, because I read it and I thought it's so good. And he made it look so easy. This isn't hard. I just got to write, I'll just do what he did. And as I'm sitting down to write it, I'm realizing, oh no, it is not easy. It's a little harder than I think it was, than it used to be. But I think the more I'm doing it, right, the more I get into the rhythm of doing it on a regular basis, it is getting easier, but it's a little rusty.
I always hear from people, they're like, how hard can it be to write a book? And part of me is like, screw you. It's like so hard. You have to sit down, you have to have the discipline, you have to have the imagination and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're always like, how hard can it be? You just make it up. And then when I'm in the moment and I can't figure out what the next scene is going to be, or like what a character's motive is or something, I just tell myself that. I'm like, how hard can I just make it up? I can literally write whatever I want. I can just make it up. So it's like it's the duality of making it up. It's easy because you can do whatever you want, but it's also hard because it's a blank slate.
That's right. Yeah, and then what I'm noticing as I'm trying to write my novel right now, and this is just that back and forth of it, right? I'm kind of trying to do both things, right? I'm trying to have a loose outline. I kind of know what I want to do. I know certain characters that I want to introduce. I know vaguely kind of how I want to end it and where I want it to land, but I don't know the specifics, right? So as I'm writing it, and I don't know if this happened to you before, but as I'm writing it, sometimes I'll come up with something that I didn't expect. And I'll be like, oh, that's really cool. I like that. But it really screws up what I was supposed to do, in the next chapter. So then it's like, okay, now what am I going to do? So that's kind of, that's frustrating, but sometimes it's almost also fun, because it's like, okay, I like this new direction, but it's also now creating this unknown of, okay, well, if I keep following this thread, where's it going to take me?
Well, and what's worse than that is when you come up with such an amazing idea and you have to rewrite like a bunch of things that you had already written to incorporate that new idea into it.
That's right. Yes, I have done that too, actually. As I'm writing, I come up with an idea. I'm like, oh, but wait a minute. That means I'm going to have to go back and change what happened on this piece of dialogue or in this scene over here. But again, that's all about the rewrite. The rewrite comes later.
Yeah. So first thing is writing an excellent book. What are the rest of the steps in the process?
Yeah. So write a good book. Once you've done that, once you've written a book, you've done the writing, you followed the outline or not, and you've got something you like. Of course, you do. That's all the technicals. You have to get an editor and all that, get a proofreader and that kind of stuff. So let's say you've got a book. Okay, now you've got a book. Now what? So what I have learned personally, but as I've applied it to Quoir and other authors, I've asked other authors to kind of duplicate this. We've noticed that this is the most important factor, and it's the book launch team. So I did this. I think I pretty much did this with all of my the 7-part series that I did that I published with Quoir. I don't even honestly know who told me how to do it or suggested that I do it. So I didn't invent this. Someone told me, oh, you got to do a book launch team. So I started doing them, and I realized, wow, this is a big key factor in the success of that book, the launch of the book. Excuse me. And so the book launch team, the short way to do it is you basically, you need to find 25, that's probably the bottom floor minimum, 25 to 40, 50 people, however many people you can get, to agree to do 4 things to help you launch your book. And the way I will go, I'll use Facebook, and I'll just post on Facebook, hey, everybody, I got a brand new book that's coming out in a couple of months. If you want to help me launch the book, I need you to do these 4 steps. And if you do, you get a big thank you gift at the end, and you help me launch my book, right? So the 4 things you ask them to do: number 1, that they will agree to read an advanced PDF copy of the book, which you will send to them. Mm-hmm. Number 2, and by the way, all of these steps must be done in order. So step number 2 is on launch day, on the day of the launch, you agree that you will purchase the book on Amazon, Kindle or paperback, doesn't matter. But you have to purchase it first, because Amazon will track verified purchases. And after you purchase the book, you will leave a rating and a review. because you've already read the book because I sent it to you, right? And like a month early. So you will rate it and review it. And then the fourth step is you'll share a link to the book on your social media and say, hey, everybody, my friend Keith just published this book. It's so great. Here's the link. Go check it out. You'll love it. And if they do all those 4 steps, you give them a nice little thank you gift. And that can vary. So what we've noticed, so I noticed it myself with my book. That's one of the key things that worked to help me launch my book. Here's the reason why it really is important, is that it really is like a launch. That metaphor is very appropriate, right? You think about launching a rocket into space, into orbit. There's all this energy, all this stuff that has to happen, to get to like 3, 2, 1, ignition, to break gravity and get that, couple of 10 tons, a couple of 100 tons of steel up into orbit. But once it's in orbit, it takes very little effort to keep it in orbit, right? So if you have this big launch and everybody on the launch team, but by the way, not everyone will ever do it. It's usually about 70% of the people on your group will do it. That's why it's better to have more than 25. Because if you have 25, 19 will do it, so you need more people to do it. But if they all do it on launch day, you get a surge of sales. Amazon notices, hey, this book is selling huge, right, on the day of launch. And, oh, wow, it's getting 4 or 5-star reviews on Amazon. And, oh, look, we're getting links coming. People are, sharing links, and links are going out. So all these things happen. And then once Amazon sees that and you hit this bestseller status in your categories, then Amazon starts helping you promote the book, right? They're like, hey, everybody, if you like that book, you should check out Keith's book. It's really good. Mm-hmm. And so we've proven that. So that's what I did myself. That's one of the ways that I did so well selling my books. But when Matt and I took over Quoir, we started telling all of the Quoir authors, hey, we want you to do this book launch thing that I've been doing. And actually, I give them Authors Academy, which teaches you how to do that for free. Like, hey, here's the free link to Authors Academy. Watch the training. If you need questions about it, we'll show you how to do it. But over the last year and a half, we've only had a couple of duds. And the duds were, we figure out why. Why was that book a dud? It's because the author, that book launch thing didn't work. And so, but if they did it, they did great. You know what I mean? And now that's not by itself, that's not the only thing, but that is a big, big, big part of it. In addition to that, it's also, so you have to have a good launch. In addition to that, it's doing podcast interviews, right? And so we have created like a little spreadsheet of sort of Quoir-friendly podcasts, and you're on that list. And of like podcasts that like, hey, I've interviewed Quoir authors and will talk to us about our books and that kind of thing. And so, we recommend minimum 5 would be nice, but, we hope that authors are really excited about their book and they want to talk about their book. So they'll do hopefully 20, 30, as many as they can, interviews about their book. So podcast interviews, as well as, I talk in Authors Academy about, as an author needs to kind of grow their platform, and social media is really the way to do that. That could be a blog. So for me, it's my blog. And I do well on that. I have a lot of followers on my blog. But I also have a YouTube channel. I have Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all that stuff, Twitter, which is horrible now. But, it's building that platform. And then I train on Authors Academy, explain kind of how to use some of those platforms. You don't want to just talk about your book all the time. If that's all you do, you're turning people off. They're going to just unfollow you and block you because that's all you ever talk about. So you have to mix it with like personal stuff as well. And I'd say another key thing is creating a Patreon page. I resisted creating a Patreon page for the longest time. My son's David, who I mentioned, I think he was the one that finally talked me into it. Him and another friend of mine. I had another friend who's an author, and between the two of them, they talked me into starting a Patreon page, and it's been great. I mean, so I'll be really transparent. Every month, my Patreon helps pay my rent, and so wow. I'm very grateful for my Patreon supporters. And
what do your Patreon supporters get?
So what I do for them. And we can talk about Patreon for a second, because I think there's a misunderstanding about how Patreon works. And this is what my friend Richard Jacobson kind of helped me understand. I think a lot of people make the mistake of treating Patreon as a transactional thing. In other words, if your mindset is, okay, there's people let's say you have tiers, right? So some people at say $2 or $5 a month, some people at $10 a month, some people at $20 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, right? And so you can get, the mistake is if you start thinking transactionally, in other words, oh my gosh, I've got like 3 people at the $50 level. That means every month I need to create content that's worth $50 for those people at the $50 level. And that's not true. And what my friend Richard Jacobson explained to me was that there are just people who love what you do, right? They're fans. They love what you do. And they want an opportunity to support you. And you're just giving them that opportunity. And so those levels are there. They're picking the level because that's how much they want to support you, right? Hey, I'd give $20 a month for Keith. Sure. Okay. And so they're not expecting $20 back. They're telling you it's worth $20 a month for me to know that you get to keep doing what you're doing because I love what you're doing. And so so I think that's the big thing. Don't think of it transactionally. What I do is I provide I do a little newsletter called Imperfect Signals. Embedded in the name of that newsletter is the fact that it's imperfect, and it's a signal that's imperfect, which means it will not be every week. But most weeks, almost every Sunday, I will write an imperfect signal. And all it is a newsletter that is like kind of behind the scenes. Like here's a project I'm working on. Here's an idea I have. Here's a podcast I'm doing. Here's something exciting that Quoir is doing that I can't talk to anybody else about, but I'll tell you guys what's going on, So it's really just kind of behind the scenes. I'm just talking to them, and they're the only people that get to know what I'm doing and what I'm thinking, right? And then I also do every Friday, I do so last time I was here, we interviewed about the book, The Quantum Sayings of Jesus, which was about the Gospel of Thomas. Mm-hmm. Well, for my Patreon supporters, every Friday, I was publishing one of those sayings and my commentary on it every Friday before there was a book. So every Friday, they got to read one of those. And then, once I did that for about a year and a half, I had enough of them and hey, let's publish a book. So see, the Patreon actually helped me work on the book as well, right? It wasn't just creating content for my Patreon supporters. It was, but then I can take that same content and later on repurpose that into a book, which then I sell.
Well, and let's real quick, let's pause and take that idea and also take an idea you mentioned earlier, which was the first step in this launch process, which was sending it out to a bunch of readers, kind of like beta readers. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Kind of, although it's not a beta reader thing. I mean, beta readers, at least in my thinking, a beta reader is sort of like, I wrote the book, but I want to hear from them what they think of it. Like, is it any good? That to me is a beta reader. The book launch team is sort of like you passed that stage. The book is ready, to publish, and you're just adding in this in between step of sending it out to these people to read advanced copies of it so that they're ready to go on launch day to buy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's just continue along with my beta reader question anyway. Then I was trying to lead you into say yes.
Sorry.
So from my own personal experience, when I've written manuscripts before, in my most recent manuscript, let's just take this as an example. I sent it out to about 20 people, and these were all solicited requests. I wasn't just like, hey, take my book. These were people that I had a conversation with about it, and in some way or another, they said yes, and they expressed interest. It's probably been 3 months now, and 2 people or 3 people have finished it.
Yeah.
Just blank from everybody else. How do you get people to read your book? And I always have in the back of my mind, maybe it sucks so bad and they don't want to tell me. But I always give the disclaimer. If it's so boring you can't get through 3 pages, give me that feedback. But I don't hear anything. So how can I get beta readers to read my stuff?
Yeah, that's tough. I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know. I don't normally do the beta reader thing. I think probably because the way I'm doing it on my Patreon, because as I'm writing all of my books, I will typically randomly like, oh, hey, here's chapter 1 or whatever, just a random chapter of the book I'm writing right now, just to kind of get them excited and hyped about it. So they'll read it and I'll get comments on it and stuff. So yeah, I will say though, maybe not so much specifically beta readers, but just like when I was in college, what I really appreciated about my creative writing classes was workshops, right? And there was a writing group here in El Paso where I live that's like an El Paso writers group. And they do this kind of thing where writers will get together. So it's all writers, right? It's not readers. It's all authors. And they'll get together and they'll share a chapter of their book. They'll print out a chapter, make copies for everybody, and they'll all read it, and then they'll get feedback, right? And I love that. That to me is gold. That was my favorite thing when I was in college, was getting that kind of feedback. Because you write something and you think it's good, and your mom thinks it's good. All your friends tell you, you're a great writer, you're amazing, that's great. But see, that's not helpful. So I really loved going into a classroom of brutal strangers who had no reason to tell me that I was great, and to read my chapters and say, that's stupid, that's dumb, I don't understand that makes no sense, fix that. And if you have to have thick enough skin to be like, yeah, okay. And the way those workshops work, you weren't allowed to speak as the author. You could just take notes. And so everything they said, you could blow off some of it, like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that, that's stupid. But pay attention to the feedback. And I love that. And I don't know where to get that. Like I said, I just found out a couple of months ago, there is a group here that does that. I've been thinking, once I get my novel that I'm writing, good enough, I might do that, join that group and just say, here's my chapters, give me some feedback. What do you guys think? Because that's gold. You know what I mean? I think as an author, you need that. You need that feedback from people that's honest feedback. It's not helpful if people are just telling you you're great if you're really not great. I'd rather hear it from them than, the comments on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, that's what I'm trying to do with this whole process of being an author and podcasting even. I'm trying to keep my ego out of it. I realize I don't have 4 million followers and I don't make $1 million a year off royalties. So I need to learn how to get to that point, keep my ego out of it, and take all the advice I can.
Yeah, exactly. We all can learn, and we all have stuff we can get better at. And yeah, for me, I will say this: writing this novel is very humbling for me. It is like, man, because I did when I was. That's the other thing. When I was young and I was writing, I think I thought I was pretty good. I was pretty cocky. And so now I'm learning, like, well, maybe I was better back then, but I don't think I'm as good as I used to be.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about the launch process. Any other comments on how to make a living as a full-time author?
Yeah. Okay. So this is the key thing. I did a talk here for the El Paso Writers League last month, and I think that's how you and I posted something about it, and you're like, hey, let's talk about that. So when I spoke to them, what I talked about was it's more than one thing. The secret sauce is that it's not one thing. And so I tell the story about how back when I was self-published as an author, I knew a couple other guys that were published authors, and they were, in my mind, these two guys. One was named Neil, one was named Frank. I'll keep the rest of it, anonymous. But Neil and Frank were, fantastic, right? They had best-selling books. One of them toured Europe, speaking at things and stuff with his book. And I'm like, oh my gosh, right? And both of these guys, huge, big names, huge books. And I just thought, yeah, one of these days I want to be like them. But then I found out, both of them independently, in different circumstances. Like Neil told me one time, we were having lunch together, and he goes, yeah, Keith, I think I'm going to have to get a job at Walmart. And I'm like, what? I'm like, you're Neil. What are you talking about? You wrote that amazing book, You're traveling Europe and speaking and stuff. He's like, yeah, but I don't make any money on the book. And I was like, what? And the same thing with Frank. Frank was the same way. And I talked to him, and the thing he told me was, he kind of let it slip in the conversation that his wife was a doctor or a psychologist or something, right? And saw clients. And so, oh, yeah, she's the one paying the bills. You're dinking around with your book, because that wasn't paying the bills. So when I realized that, when Neil and Frank kind of burst my bubble, I was like, well, I'm never going to be bigger. I'd have to be bigger than those guys, right? To be full-time author just on my books. So that's why I never believed it was possible. And so the way it happened was, I lost my job. I had moved from Orange County, California, where I lived for 25 years. I took this job in Idaho. I shouldn't have, but I had red flags, but I still took the job because I needed a job and no one else was offering me a job, and it was great pay. But we had to move my wife and I had to move to a whole other state, rip up our family and move there. It was so painful. It was horrible, but we had to do it, right? So we did it. We moved to Boise, Idaho, took this job, and it was a nightmare. It was the worst decision I think I've ever made in my life. It was horrible. And so I lost that job. So now I'm stuck in Idaho. I'm thinking, why am I here? I only came here for that stupid job. I don't know anybody here. And now I'm screwed. What do I do now? And that sort of pushed me out of the boat, right? Once it happened to me, I would never have done this had I not lost the job. But because now I'm desperate, I don't have a job, and I'm trying to find a job and I can't find a job. But it was kind of the perfect timing, because right about that time, I think by that time I published my third book in what would become the 7-part series. So now I had 3 books of royalties. I had also just started doing some online courses that were based on my book, and I was getting income from the online courses. I couldn't get a job, but I was doing some freelance work. So I was getting some money from freelance copywriting on the side. And then my Patreon supporters, when I was making a couple $100, maybe $300 or $400 every month on my Patreon. I told my Patreon supporters what had happened, that, oh my gosh, I moved to Idaho, this nightmare job, that lost the job. I'm not sure I can pay my rent. And my Patreon supporters kicked in like $1,500 to $1,500 a month, and paid my rent, kept me alive. And so then I used the metaphor like I was sort of walking on water at that point. It was sort of like month after month was going by, and I was paying my bills, and the electricity was still on, and there was food in the house, and there was gas in the car, and we were paying all the bills. And I was like, we're doing this. I don't have a job, but we're doing this. We're making it, right? And it was kind of like, at first I was like, I'm not even sure how I'm doing it. I'm not going to stop and figure it out. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because it works, right? I'm going to keep until it stops working. I'm just going to keep doing it. So, but anyway, now that I've figured it out, I've been doing this for 5-6 years now. What I figured out is it's not one thing. So if I was trying to be like Neil and Frank and say, oh, I need to make a full-time living only on my royalties. No, that's right. You won't do it. So it's not just royalties. It's book royalties, and it's online courses, and it's my Patreon, and it's freelance copywriting, and it's my podcasting because our podcasts are monetized. So it's multiple income streams.
Yeah.
That's the key. That's been the key. And if you can figure out how to get all these different income streams paying out steadily every month to certain levels, then you make it, right? Now, the downside to this is the downside, and this is reality. And so I don't want to act like this is, it's just magic and it's beautiful. Sometimes it is, but it's also really, I also blog. So I get paid for my Patheos blog. So that's the other kind of moving piece in this. Anyway, so the thing is that, I can't predict my income, right? I can't tell you right now what my royalty check's going to be next month. I have no idea what my Patheos blogging numbers are going to be, what I'm going to get from my podcast, or what I'm going to get from I keep doing it and I can be steady at that, but it varies. Sometimes those numbers are lower than I expect. And so if, let's say my royalties are lower than I expect one month, then that means, those other things need to produce a little more to make up for that. And so sometimes it gets a little scary. Like, okay, are we going to be able to make it work this month? Thankfully, it's not like that all the time, but it can be like that, because when your income depends on 6 or 7 different income streams, you have to kind of make sure all those things are working great. And if they're not, you got to have a way to kind of make up for it.
So I think you're kind of in a unique situation because you are also a publisher on top of all these things. But let's remove publishing from the situation here. How many hours a week does somebody have to put in to become successful enough to pay their bills, even if it is multiple income streams? Are we talking, hey, you could do this as a 10-hour a week side gig, or are you putting in 80 hours a week?
Great question. And I just want to emphasize, though, that I was doing this full-time author thing before I was a co-owner of Quoir Publishing, right? So Quoir Publishing only started a year and a half ago. I've been doing the full-time author for like 5 years. And so that's just added another income stream on top of the other things that I'm doing, which has helped a whole lot. I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, good question about the time, how much time it takes. So obviously, before I lost that job in Idaho, I already had a Patreon, a couple $100 going, not a lot, but I had a few people on my Patreon. I had a blog on Patheos that was paying me a little bit every month, I was doing the podcast at the time. It wasn't monetized. I was doing some freelance now and again, but it wasn't a lot. When I lost the job, suddenly I had nothing but free time. And so then I could do a whole lot more of those things to focus on that, right? Right now, because I'm a full-time author and I'm running Quoir, again, that's probably the other downside. I don't have weekends, like almost never. I almost never have a Saturday off, right? Mm-hmm. And like with anybody who's an entrepreneur that owns a business, when you own a business, it doesn't matter if it's 6 a.m. or 4 a.m., you're working. You have an idea, something comes up, you got to put out this fire, you got to call that person. Oh my gosh, I got to work on that. So you just work on everything all the time. You just kind of keep all the plates spinning. So for me now, yeah, it's like every hour in the week. I have to intentionally block out time on my calendar, and I do. So like I try to make Fridays. I don't do anything on Fridays. That's my day off. And I try now to have like a Saturday morning, afternoons and stuff, because otherwise I wouldn't have weekends. It would just kind of takes over your life. So, and it's hard, I know, because the way, again, so I was doing, like I said, I was doing these things while I had a full-time job, but I would, unless I had lost the job, I would never have sort of made the point of like, hey, let's increase these things to the point. I mean, my long-term goal in the back of my mind was, had I not lost the job, the plan was, hey, at some point, I'm going to have 6 or 7 or 8 books, and hopefully they all are bestsellers and they all do well, and they're kind of evergreen titles that all combined, once you've got 7, 8, 9 books in print, and you can kind of keep the marketing going on those, mm-hmm. you're gonna have a decent income every month, right? So that was my plan. I think my plan, had I not lost the job, the plan was that at some point I was going to hit this tipping point where it was like, hey, I could quit my day job and I could just focus on my books, right? And there's a chance maybe that would have happened eventually. But again, I didn't have to figure that out. It just sort of happened to me.
Mm-hmm. So you still haven't given me an hours. Are we talking? And again, remove Quoir from this, because I understand that that's an additional responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I guess I haven't thought about it, so I'd have to add it up, I guess. So you mean like right now, how much energy am I putting to all those things?
Let's just say before Quoir, because you said you've only been doing that for a year and a half. So,
yeah.
How long were you doing before that?
Yeah. So it's probably maybe like 10 hours. That's probably not true. 4 to 5 hours a week on some freelance writing. 1 to 2 hours a week on blogging. 3 to 4 hours on podcasting. Another 2 hours or so for Patreon. It varies. Mm-hmm. And then writing a book. If I'm in the phase of either researching or outlining or writing a book, then that goes up, because now I'm going to probably writing, a couple hours every day until it's done. And then there's the rewrites and edits, all that stuff.
The point, what I was getting at, is it's not as easy as people think. Not impossible, as you're saying, but not as easy as you think. Yeah,
and again, that's what I said at the beginning. I don't ever want to paint the picture like it's so easy. No, if your idea is like that being an author, I want to be an author because that would be easier than what I'm doing now, then don't do it. Because it's easier just to get up and go to work, sit in a cubicle and, to put in your hours and go home. That's easier. It's not as fun, and there have been times that I've thought about that, like, man, this is, like during some of the times, like I was saying, when financially, like one thing drops and the other things have to kick in and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be able to make it financially? During those seasons when I've had a couple of months like that, and then I start thinking to myself, I could just go get a job. I could just stop doing this, But then when I think about it that way, and I'm like, yeah, I could go get a job, but then I would have to stop doing all these things. And all these things are the things I love to do. I'm living my dream. I'm doing what I thought I could never do. I'm a full-time author. I get to write all the time, and writing is all I want to do. And even if I got a job, because I was a copywriter, freelance, not a freelance, I was a marketing advertising copywriter for a while. If I got a job, that's what I would do. So now I'm just writing for somebody else, and I'm making somebody else a lot more money. And I don't want to do that, So yeah, it's not easy. I definitely don't want to paint the picture like, oh, it's so easy. You got to love it. You got to want to do it. You got to say like, I want to spend my time. I want to get up early in the morning, get my cup of coffee, sit down at the computer, and I want to write for a couple hours and know that when I'm done, I can go get a second cup of coffee and sit down and write something else. I can write a blog post. I can, work on something, another project.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to that myself. I'm frustrated because I don't have as much time as I want to write. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's pretend that I had, $10 million and I never had to work again. What would I do? And I'm like, I would just write. Like, it comes down to the love of writing. I have these ideas inside me that I have to get out. And, the quip I always say, the quote that I've mentioned a few times is, writing is an active ego, and we might as well admit it. It's because what's going on in my head is so important. I have to get out so everybody else can know what's going on in my head.
That's right. Yeah, if you just knew it, but if you could see what I'm seeing, if you knew what that'd be so great. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, my final question for you then. I'm here on Quoir's website. I'm looking at the Authors Academy bundle. It says buy for $99. And I'm looking at, and I see Authors Academy Part 1 and Authors Academy Part 2, $49 each. So my question is, why would I bundle when I can save $1 and buy them separately?
Oh, let me see. So yeah, it says it's $99. Yeah, here's what happened. We're in the process, because I mentioned we're getting ready to launch Quoir Academy as a separate thing. So we've been playing with price points and stuff. So that's why right now you're right. You could probably get them separately and get them for more money, but we're tweaking that right now. So yeah, I think it's going to be $99. We're probably going to get rid of Part 1 and Part 2, and it's just going to be the bundle, which is the whole thing, which is 12 sessions.
All right. Well, you have the Writers Are People 2 discount right now, $1 off if you buy them separately. So go to the website and take care of that.
You know what I'll do?
Any final questions?
You know what I'll do? Can I do this? I'll give like a discount for your listeners. Like if they want to get it, I'll do like a 75% off or something.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, send that to me and I'll put that a link in.
Yeah, I'll make a coupon code, and I'll tell you what, the coupon will be Matt.
Perfect.
And if they use that coupon code Matt, they can get it for, what did I say, 75% off? That is a huge deal.
That is an awesome deal. In fact, I might just buy that as well.
Okay. Cool,
Keith. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Anything else?
No, I mean, I guess just talking to authors, I just want to encourage everybody. Like, again, this is my story. This is how I figured it out. And again, I think the secret is multiple income streams and, figuring that part out. And that's not easy. I know for a lot of people, people have different gifts and things and skill sets. But I just want to say, again, I never thought I could do it. And I ended up doing it. And when I talk about this kind of stuff with other authors, it's to encourage them that it is possible. And maybe it isn't going to ever be enough for you to quit your day job, but it may be enough, like you were saying, like a side hustle, where you're making pretty good money on your books, which feels really good, to write your book and have it be successful, and then find and build a platform, build an audience of people that love your work, and have connection with them, whether that's through a Patreon or a Facebook group or something like that. I just encourage people to do that and to believe that that's possible, because I think it really is.
Awesome. Well, I love your vision, and I appreciate you coming on. Everybody, we had Keith Giles.
Thanks so much, Matt.